to the organizer for inviting me to this very interesting workshop. So I start with my talk. My talk is about statuette representing a woman with infant, usually one infant, sometimes rarely more than one, in southern Etruria, and Latium Vetus also representing a couple of two women, or a man and a woman with one infant usually, sometimes with more than one infant. I was saying it's about these statuettes that are typical objects used in ancient Italy to communicate with the supran and non-human entities about issues regarding mothering, childhood, coming of age, well-being, and family belonging. They are particularly frequent in the Latian, Etruscan, Campanian area. In southern Etruria and Latium Vetus, where, as I said, couples are also present, the offering of this votive object took often place in sanctuaries within the urban area. The central position made the ritual performance very visible, and therefore we can argue that it was important not only for individual members of a family, but for the entire community. If we move south, the number of statuettes not only decreases significantly, with the exception of Capua, but they are more frequently found in sacred contexts in suburban and extra-urban areas, not really near water sources. There is also an increasing number of funding inside tombs. The use of this votive object seems to be in Magna Graecia and Sicily, on the one hand, more relegated to the feminine dimension, and on the other hand, more private. I was saying Campania seems to be somehow in between, and it is actually, as we all know, in between from a geographical point of view. So, I will take into account, as I said, the statuette of the above-mentioned type only from the funerary context in ancient Italy. So only not from the sanctuary, but only from tombs. And these are the data. So from Latium Vetus, okay, I have to say, I distinguish between Curotrophos and Curophoros. Curotrophos are statuettes representing a breastfeeding woman, while Curophoros are statuettes representing a woman with normally one infant or maybe more than one infant in very different situations, combinations, but not breastfeeding. And so from Latium Vetus, we have one Curotrophos for Praeneste, this one, 3rd century BCE. From southern Etruria, we have these statuettes you can see here, and actually I put them only for the sake of exhaustivity, but as you can see, we have a Isis lactans that is completely different thing, let's say so, from Vetulonia. We have this one that is the Curophoros from Volterra, probably a miniaturized copy of the so-called Curotroph of Maffei. Then we have this couple, the couple normally is not present in tomb. This is the only example I can mention present in a tomb. They're usually in sanctuaries, and as you can see, there are two enthroned women, similar but not identical, with a child seated between their legs on the ground, more or less 3rd century BCE. And we also have this cairnos made of 3 jars with 3 curophoroi attached to it from Faleri Veteris, end of the 1st century BCE. And this is all we have. And again, I want to underline that we have the amount of these statuettes in this area is enormous. But these are the only statuettes that come from a funerary context. Then in Campania, we have 8 Curotrophoi from Nola, Cume, Atella, Teanum, Sidicinum, and 1 from Ponte Cagnano, Curophoros, more or less 4th century BCE. And first of all, we should notice that of 9 are coroplastic. Normally it's quite the opposite. I mean, corophoria are more frequent, and 7 out of 8 are following of this typology you see here. That is actually the most widespread typology in Campania of coroplastic. It's a seated woman suckling a baby at her left breast, and she has round earrings. She has shoulder-length braids. She's holding her uncovered left breast from which the baby is feeding. The naked baby is reaching for the right arm of the woman with its left hand. It's interesting to note that this one from Cumae was found close to the skull of a young boy. Cumae was, as we all know, the first ancient Greek colony on the mainland of Italy. Then we move to Magna Graecia. And again, I want to underline the fact that in Magna Graecia and Sicily, these votive objects are quite rare, not very common, but they are more frequently inside tombs. So we have 7 coroplastic from Paestum, Turiel, Taras, 11 corophorii from Heraclea, Ture, Bauste, and Taras. Concerning the context of funding, the coroplastic from Ture is very relevant because it was part of the grave goods of a 5-year-old girl, along with 2 other statues representing a seated woman with a goose on the left and 19 miniature-sized artifacts. But the most intriguing, I would say, is this one from Bauste. The statue represents a seated woman with an infant in her arm. The infant is held with the woman's left arm in an almost vertical position. It is covered by the woman's mantle. This gesture is quite typical in this kind of statuettes, and possibly it's a gesture of protection. I don't know, it's just my idea. And it comes from a votive deposit related to the burial of an old woman about 70 years old and an infant about 2-4 years old. The rest of the material is without contest and it comes from Taras. Among this material, there are some very refined statuettes of the Hellenistic period belonging to this typology you see here. A seated woman suckling a naked infant at her left breast. The infant is reaching for the woman's left breast with her its left hand. The infant has its back to us, and the woman is holding its wrist. The infant can be winged or not winged. Outside Taras, we have a fragment of a statue of this type from Heraclea, from a votive deposit, so not from tomb, and one probably from Capua without context. Another typology relatively frequent is this one, a standing woman with a standing girl. We have the girl here. A standing girl beside her. She's holding her left hand with her right hand. The woman is looking towards the child. The child is holding a piece of her tunic with her free hand. It is worth noticing, in fact, that the infant is a girl, which is quite rare. In the case of an infant grave where we don't know, it's most likely belong to a female. Also in another statuette from Heraclea, the infant who is sitting in the woman's lap seems to be a girl. Since she is winged, one should think of representation of Aphrodite and Eros, but the infant is wearing a tunic and, as I said, seems to be a girl. Winged infant or adolescent are relatively frequent in the funeral context in South Italy. They may have been produced as statuette of Aphrodite and Eros and then used for different purposes. It must be said that they are also found in votive context, so not only in tomb, especially in Bruttium. Here we have just a miscellanea from Taras, and I would like to underline this and the model terracotta group in particular, since they represented these really nice scenes of everyday life. So we have this figure, probably a nurse who is watching over a sleeping child in a cradle with a dog. And this one representing a kneading woman with an infant climbing to her back. Then we move to Sicily. And Sicily, we have 10 coroplastic and 11 corophoroi. The material from Sicily, the most numerous, the material from Sicily is the most numerous, generally speaking. Again, these statues are not as common as in northern part of Italy. But this material is quite varied. The first thing to note is the archaic dating of most of these statuettes. Among coroplastic, the most frequent typology is typical of Sicily, this one, an enthroned woman with a big infant enveloped in a big mantle in her lap. The infant has long hair. Because of the size of the infant and the long hair, the small figure may be intended to be the dead person with a female deity. Similar statuettes have also been found in the Bruttium in sacred contests linked to Persephone, like this one from Lockery. In these cases, the connection with the afterlife may be confirmed by the presence of the pomegranate. The pomegranate is not present in the statue from Sicily. From Camarina comes a statuette of a female figure, this one enthroned with an Aegis figure, probably wrapped in a shroud on her knees. All of these figurines may belong to a mystical context and therefore have little to do with motherhood and childhood. The rest of the material is sporadic and completely devoid of context. The woman with the child on the shoulder is a typical typology from Sicily. I will draw attention to two statues from the Punic necropolis of Panormus, these two. The context is only partially known and connected with the sarcophagi of adults. The standing woman is already a dove in her hand. It may be connected to Astarte. Besides this object of Punic influence, the others come from Greek colonies or Hellenized indigenous centers. The material of greater interest to us is that from Libra, and we have already seen this one. It's extremely important because we know for 4 out of 5 the context of funding. 3 of the 5 statuettes have a molded head and modeled body and are believed to be never used as toys. For this reason, it is believed that they belong to the tombs of young girls. They date back to mid-5th century BCE. 2 represent a woman bathing a little girl. Infant bathing is considered a very important activity and carried out primarily by the mother or other attachment figure for the baby. The other is a polychromatic, disproportionate statuette of a laughing woman with a clownish feature with an infant in her lap, and we've seen this. The infant is reaching for her breast. To my knowledge, it is an unicum, and it was found with a doll and gold dust. A more, let's say, classic coroplastic came from the infant from an infant tomb mid-4th century, this one. And there is also a so-called statuette of Andromache and Axinas from the Hellenistic period. It is interesting to note that a very similar statuette was found in a ritual context. This could confirm the reuse of this object for funerary purposes. I just want to mention, I want to recall finally, and I will explain at the end why. The famous statue of Coroplastic nursing 2 twins, the so-called Dea del Cimento, and this also comes from a necropolis in Megara, Iberia. So the discovery contest is often absent. In particular, the most important data for art is frequently missing: the sex and age of the deceased. Let us assume, however, that these statuettes in southern Italy were a predominantly part of the grave goods of women and children or adolescents, as, for example, was in Greece. Indeed, putting this type of statues in tombs is probably something that should be related to the Greek origin of colonies in Magna Graecia and Sicily. As we saw in southern Etruria and Latium Vetus, the religious usage of this object was significantly different and much more common. I will say that most of the statues of women with infants come from women's graves. Probably not, but not necessarily the buried woman was mother, and the deposed object probably had the function of prolonging the role of mother after death, but also of celebrating the important role of mother after death. Ideally, the woman would not stop being a mother in death, and her offspring remain present near her in some way. It must be said that these are standardized objects created mainly for votive usage. So the child is usually one, but we can understand it as, let's say, a synecdoche. That is, even if the woman had many children, a statuette with only one will still have been symbolically used, or maybe more statues in the same grave. Having said so, I will focus on infants' graves since we want to investigate the maternal presence in case of an untimely loss. Indeed, we can assume that the deposition of these objects in the tomb was probably done by the mother, even if not necessarily. From the few data we have, mainly from Lipara, we see that they were mainly placed in a young girl's grave, as can be expected. These statues were probably, as I already stated, produced for another purpose, then reuse or use ad hoc as grave goods. We can assume that they ideally represented the child and a woman related to it, likely the mother who put the object in the tomb, likely the woman who put the object in the tomb. Statues representing a breastfeeding woman, could potentially be deposited by any female figures connected in some way to the baby and able to breastfeed, therefore primarily the biological mother, but also the wet nurse. In the case of statues representing a woman holding in various ways one or more infants or following, any of the female figures who took care of the infant and were attached to it may have been a religious agent, a caregiver within the household, a relative, or even a particularly close neighbor. She may have been a stepmother if the biological mother had died or been divorced, or very possibly a wet nurse if a grandmother, her aunt, an elder sister. But also a man, the father of the pecador, who understood the importance for the offspring of having the maternal figure close to it in the ultramundane journey. All these figures may have acted, moreover, on behalf of third parties. In this regard, the discovery of bust of a coroplastic in a tomb in which an elderly woman and a child were buried together is very interesting. But as previously stated, the agent is most likely the mother. And the most likely function of this object was to overcome mourning through religious means by trying to keep the maternal presence close to the offspring after death, as support, comfort, concrete aid in the case of breastfeeding. In the case that death is female, the statue could also be an allusion to the failed motherhood during life and a wish for an otherworldly form of motherhood. In both cases, it will be a form of consolation for the mother who continues to live without her child. Alternatively, they may have been toys apparently not used. In any case, maternal training for girls also passed through playing, and these would be toys that, within this context, will allude again to a failed motherhood. I will focus to conclude on a particular type of statues that were found relatively often in Magna Graecia, especially in tombs. Those depicting a woman with a winged child. These are probably statuettes created to represent Aphrodite and Eros as a child. Then, probably, a mother saw herself and a lost offspring in the representation and decided to use or reuse it as a grave god. The fact that the baby has wings could be consistent with the idea of the afterlife. Again, we find this time of artifact in Hellenistic cemeteries in Greece. I would also like to mention the presence in the tombs of Taras and Ripara of grateful and model statues representing a scene of everyday life of women taking care of infant. In summary, to conclude, statues representing a woman with infant have been found throughout ancient Italy, but they are numerous only in the Latian, Etruscan, Campanian area. In this area, they were offered massively in sanctuary, especially urban, and in any case close to the urban area, starting from the 5th century BCE, but especially during the 3rd century BCE. In Southern Etruria and Latium Veneto, in the same sanctuary, statues of couple with infant were also offered. This type of wattage performance, therefore, is typical of area with an Etruscan background and early Romanized. Further south, in the early Hellenized areas, the statues are few and are sometimes found inside tombs. This is, in fact, consistent with Greek custom. This may be the reason Campania seems to be somehow, as I said, in between. When we find them in the grave of infant and adolescent, they clearly speak to us of the mothers which remain somehow next to the offspring after the death. In the case of a male deceased, we can probably see the allusion to failed motherhood in life, which will hopefully take place in the afterlife, even if the case were supposed to be toys. The highest number of statues in Sicily and some areas of Magna Graecia may be connected, in addition to custom imported by the Greek colonizer, also to the presence in this area of female deities connected with motherhood and with the world of the dead, generally indicated with the Greek name Demetra and coroplastic. The so-called dea of Cimento may be an expression of this divine local belief, especially in Sicily and possibly in Bruzio. Very general conclusion, maternity and maternal grief are evident in archaic and Hellenistic Italy, but with clear regional variation. Curotropoi and curophori are found in urban sanctuary in Etruria and Lazio, and were probably a public affair. Moving south, they are found more often in burial contexts and seem more a private expression of grief. And